Hi there, you're listening to False Summits, a history podcast about the American West. My name is Mason Orlando, and today with me is the lovely Jess Leigh.
Hello, lovely.
And the wonderful Marcelo Aguilar.
Howdy, everybody.
How are we all doing today?
Awesome.
Pretty good.
All right, you guys ready to talk about a mining disaster?
Am I ready to hear about my disaster? Every day I'm ready to hear about one.
All right, then. The North Butte Mining disaster of 1917, sometimes referred to as the Specular or Granite Mountain disaster, which is still, to my knowledge, the worst hard rock mining disaster in American history. Just before midnight on June 8th, 1917, an accidental fire broke out over 2,200 feet below ground, and within an hour, more than 400 miners would be in a fight for their lives, having to escape a dark maze of mines while battling smoke, superheated air, flames, and poisonous gas. The ordeal would last 3 days and kill 163 men, and leave virtually no one within the city of Butte who hadn't experienced the loss of a family member or a friend in that time. While many of the miners and rescuers did work selfishly and risk their lives to save others, the same bravery and humility could not be given to the mine owners and the powers that be. The event would cause the event would cause long-growing resentment that people had towards the mine management and their out-of-state owners to boil over into a strike that would be followed by a murder, which would then escalate into a military occupation, later suspending the constitutional rights first in Montana and then for the rest of the United States.
Wait, so what you're saying is this started off as like a bunch of bosses kind of being jerks to their workers and then it turned into a military like thing?
Well, what happened is there was a disaster in the mine, and that led to, people's frustrations being intensified, and that led to a strike. And you know what? Let's go ahead and get into it.
Yeah, let's get into this. Sounds like I want to walk this path.
I was going to say, that sounds like a very familiar story.
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
It's the hero's journey.
Oh, I'm sure you do.
So this is a picture advertisement for Butte. Can you read that for us, Jess?
Butte, Montana, the richest hill on earth, center of Montana's wonderland. And then there's a picture on the left of what I perceive as a younger buff man, and it says, "Ride in and look us over. Until then, Tapper Light, yours truly, Butte." And then at the bottom, it says, "Last of the western frontier towns, metropolis of the treasure state, world's greatest mining camp, land of the shining mountains."
Right, and that's it's an advertisement from Butte from the 50s. Tapper Light, that has something to do with when you put dynamite in the holes to make them explode. You tap them light so they don't explode, I think.
Yeah. So at the bottom where it says land of the shining mountains, that mean like the mountains are shining from the explosions?
Yes, it's from the bright gunpowder flashes.
But I want it to shine from the ore, not from explosions.
Well, it is. It's just very, very, very hot ore that you're seeing.
Yeah.
Also,
Stay
I gotta
far
say,
away.
the advertisement for the town is very suspicious because the richest hill on earth, I disagree. As Benny Hill, was he alive at this point? Benny Hill, that man is far richer than this hill.
I'm pretty sure he was. Like, if nothing else, was a young man.
He doesn't seem like he had any money, but
well,
But yeah, no, so this is an old advertisement for Butte. As of now, it's still like a mining town you can go to. We might actually check it out at one point. That said,
I would like that because I still haven't been to Montana yet.
We were so close in Yellowstone, but
you were edging on Montana.
That's technically true, unfortunately. But yeah, no, you get to the western north corner of the park, and you're pretty much in Montana. But anyway, uh, in 1917, Butte, Montana was actually an economic powerhouse due to it sitting on, as Marcelo pointed out, the largest supply of copper, um, giving it the nickname the richest hill on earth. However, this title did have a downside. At the time of our story in his book, Michael Punke's Fire and Brimstone, the North Butte mining disaster of 1917, which is our main source for today's episode, it describes Butte, Montana in the mid 1910s as one of the most god awful ugly cities in America. And although
Richest and ugliest hill on the planet.
God, that picture is like that looks like
Yeah.
dystopian nightmare, if you
wait,
ask me.
It's like what I imagine like Liverpool like used to look like, but like without the ocean.
or the Beatles.
Very smoky and just drab and depressing.
Yeah,
It looks like an ashtray.
It does. And not like one of the fancy kinds that you would see in like the 1950s New York, Las Vegas casinos or anything like that.
No, this is one that like needs to get thrown out. Like it's like somebody needs to shake it out.
Yeah.
You know, as bad as it was. Go ahead.
Go on,
No,
please. Let's keep shitting on Butte.
It reminds me of one of those big plastic buckets that's just filled with sand and old cigarette butts.
You're not wrong, though, is the thing.
Doesn't it?
I mean,
it's like if you printed out the screenshot of like a samurai movie and then wet the paper.
Yeah.
I mean, all that said, it definitely did have its classy side. You know,
but where are all the birds?
Well,
they're dead. They're all on the road. That's what the road's made out of.
No, I'll get into that. Like they had, you know, things like Victorian mansions and multi-stories department stores, fancy theaters, college. You know, all these elements of high culture were kind of peppered in among the head frames that resembled giant gallows that would be accompanied by piles of slag 40 feet high. Do you guys know what slag is?
I do. I have a hard time describing it, though.
So
I know it has something to do with like the melting of the ore.
I just know it in like sci-fi references.
I think that
means like.
I think that's something different. The slag is actually the toxic mud and rock that mines produce. Like it's just the rock that they throw out while trying to get the ore. So it's just kind of,
that's right.
Mountain insides.
It's like rock poop.
Yep.
Ew.
Basically, it's like gemstone waste.
It looks like the set of There Will Be Blood.
Yeah, I mean it's not that far off.
Like Daniel Day-Lewis is somewhere around there yelling at somebody.
Yeah, but these that's the head frame of a mine, and so like this would be. So I believe like that's where the hoist would come down, and you would go into these elevators that they called hoists. But
what is the little structure?
I believe that's a powerhouse, meaning that's where the
got it.
Engines for the hoist system would be there. We'll have some more pictures.
They would just like go straight in from like the little underneath the little tower.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So you would have like so picture this. There would be like a cable going down here, and then there would be a cable that goes into this powerhouse. So it's kind of like you know, the tram system at the zoo, the thing that the Skylook that goes over Balboa Park and the zoo and stuff.
Yeah.
Similar deal. Only, you know, putting people in a hole and not tourists in the sky.
And a lot less terrible pandas.
But yeah, so each of these mines, they usually ran around the clock and would be connected by its own railroad to smelters whose smokestacks would billow out noxious fumes and, like you guys said, killing anything green. In fact, lamps would have to be required sometimes during the day just because the smoke would be, so thick. Now,
they turn the lights on during the daytime?
Yeah, just sometimes, only sometimes, just because there's so much pollution in the air.
Jesus.
Um, but yeah,
Well, that didn't lead to any fires.
so this the smell was another thing entirely. The smelters made the air reek of sulfur, and this blended with the waste pits that lay on the outskirts of town, where 6 slaughterhouses got rid of the remnants of their work. Um,
Oh,
all of this would have paired nicely to the town's open sewers.
sure, sure. They
Now,
just, oh,
if are you guys into nightlife? I got some nightlife for you. Many of these miners, being unmarried and with
Most
regular
definitely.
yeah, a bunch of stinky nightlife people.
with regular coin in their pocket, enjoyed a vibrant nightlife where saloons outnumber churches 6 to 1. They had awesome names like Payday, Bucket of Blood, The Cesspool, and Open All Night.
Bucket of Blood. I would be there
Good
regularly.
blood.
I would be their most popular regular.
I hope that like Up All Night is just ironic and they like close before anybody else.
No, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
glad you brought that up. There were a lot of bars that just weren't built with like locks, allegedly, because like
Oh,
the
they
bars
just
didn't
they're
close.
like,
Yeah.
we don't need that. Don't worry about it.
So, yeah, Bucket of Blood. I would definitely be visiting as many happy hours as possible.
And I appreciate the effort put into at least build a couple of churches. Like,
Yeah.
just for when their parents come over, they're like, no, look, we built some churches. It's fine.
You need redemption on Sunday, you know.
That's right. Yeah.
Some of us.
Yeah. Or just, shade.
Yeah, right. Yeah, see, it's not just bars.
After having a few, many of the miners would mosey on over to a part of town known as Venus Alley, Butte's red light district that was said to employ more than 1,000 women in 1917, and allegedly they paid license fee to conduct business in the city.
So it's like Wall Street. Is that what we're talking about? Just a bunch of sophisticated business ladies behind desks?
Yes,
Okay, great.
in Venus Alley.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Awesome.
Venus and Associates.
All that said, the people took a sense of pride in their sinful, smelly, and wild mining camp of a town. After all, it was Butte's livelihood, mining that is, and
I
Butte
mean,
was
you got to
their
be
home,
number one at something, right?
right? And you know what? They saw beauty in that, someplace that could provide for them. There was an array of social clubs you could join. Baseball was huge, so was boxing, and for some reason, horse racing.
Well,
I
mean,
believe one of the guys we'll talk about later was into it, so everyone else was into it. They actually had 12 libraries along with 3 newspapers, and even a company-owned amusement park called Columbia Gardens.
it was probably like one of those things where like one person goes out of town and then picks up a new hobby and brings it back, and then everybody else picks up that person's hobby.
I mean, a little bit. If like the one guy you're talking about is like the 3 guys that own everything in town, yes.
Guys,
Yeah.
I'm into falconing now. We're all into falconing
there's
now.
just herds of falcons, flocks of falcons.
So
All right,
many
it's the
falcon
speaker,
turds.
baby. Don't.
Bunches of falcons.
I was talking to my cat. Socially, though, tensions had been building in Butte for years due to stagnant wages, labor disputes, ethnic divisions, World War I, and the resentment of the draft tempers actually flared when on June 5th, 1917, the day when men were required to register for the draft, an anti-war demonstration was held. It was led by Finnish and Irish leftists, and after the mayor had demanded the crowd dispense, it erupted into a riot, and the National Guard was called, which 20 men and 1 woman were arrested after that. But these draft riots would mostly be forgotten, as the disasters 3 days later would pretty much make it nothing in the collective memory of everyone.
I
Detention,
wonder what that's
man.
like.
right?
It's happened. Some major gigantic historical event happens, and then a few days later, we all forget about it and move on.
I don't know
Yeah,
what you're
right.
talking about.
The Kendrick and Drake beef. Okay, let's not pretend like it didn't happen.
Hey, you know what? We're trying to like create an audience, and you're bringing up like polarizing. I'm gonna say
Divisive
it bullshit.
politics.
But the tensions developing in the so-called mining camp hadn't been created in a vacuum, and they were a result of 50 or so years of extreme industrialization, combined with social and political conflict that left its marks on the land and in the hearts and minds of the miners and citizens who worked and lived there. So, in order to better understand how things got to such a crucial point even before the disaster, we'll take a little look of the history of Butte's history of Butte, its mining industry, and the men who set to control both. And yeah, are you guys excited?
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
All right.
Excited to hear about this business crime syndicate.
the
All right.
business.
Here we go. So Montana's mining started sometime in the early 1860s when miners leaving California and Nevada after operations in those places had mostly been taken over by larger mining concerns. They came to the state looking for open claims. In 1864, William Allison and G.O. Humphreys made a claim near the headwaters of Clark Fork River, naming it Baboon Gulch. As more miners came into that area, it was quickly renamed to Butte City due to the nearby hill, and later city would be dropped from the name entirely. I would have stuck with Baboon Gulch though.
Yeah,
Just
I was
saying.
gonna say that was the number one. Like he found it, he's like, you know what this looks like? A baboon's gulch. That's what it really. This is like
I
reminds me of
love
home.
it.
I
It's
really,
just so much more fun.
I mean, I really wish there were baboons there, but that's not the story we're here to tell. In just under 3 years, around 5,000 miners, the pickaxe and gold pan kind, known as placing mining, now worked the area and created a standard mining camp for the day, a rough and tumble place where opportunity and violence was intertwined, and vice was the only real form of entertainment. And into the roughness of a miner's life was the harsh Montana winters and unsanitary conditions. This actually caused 10% of the population to die between the months of September and May. So,
Oh wow.
yeah.
Wow.
So the
I
first,
mean, yeah, they're thinking like, hey man, we're not gonna, they probably already understand that like it's hard life, you know. So like work, enjoy it while you can.
Yeah. I mean,
maybe,
like to a lot of people, 10% wouldn't seem like a lot, but that actually is a lot.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's if you live in a small town, hell yeah, it's a lot.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
and a lot of people, like, they came out there and be like, oh, I'm going to be a miner, it's going to be easy money. And
Give me
like,
one
can you
second.
imagine if like it was like cryptocurrency, but instead of just like losing your money, you were just like died in the winter in
With
Montana?
black lung. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but anyway, the first boom for that area was over by 1870, as most of the gold near the surface had been mined, and the population was down to a meager 251. With 81 of those people being Chinese nationalists, that due to the extreme prejudice of the day, Chinese miners would often be regulated to work in lower valued or previously worked areas or claims. The silver deposits were always known to be in the area. However, to reach that, placer miners wouldn't be able to do that because you can't just dig. Shafts need to be sunk into the rock. Any ore recovered needed to be crushed, sorted, smelted, all which requires massive amounts of capital and technology. Something place miners, whose claims were often referred to as poor man's diggings, lacked. Two men were able to yield both capital and technology to revitalize Butte and become Montana's first captains of industry. They went by the names of William Clark and Marcus Daly.
Man, that's nuts. That was like there was a time when like the people who were at the very bottom of like the work or like production level could potentially, if they were lucky enough, like skyrocket to the top. But even then, like the people that were in charge, like they didn't want to go in there and go find this stuff, but it was just like the guys, like or whatever, like the people like digging up this stuff themselves that were actually earning like the wealth.
Well, sometimes that was very rarely what happened. Again, I'm going to go back to the Bitcoin analogy. It's like, there are some people that made a shit ton of money, but the majority of those people were either already wealthy people. While there were some outliers that were just regular guys that made a bunch of money, that was hardly ever the case. And I think the same could be
Oh,
said
wow.
about the gold, the gold rush, silver rush. The more we get into this podcast, I think the more you're going to see just how, uh,
Kind of
truly
like a
just,
fabrication of
it's
the
just,
myth. The myth.
yeah, the myth is that, you could come out, be a miner and make a bunch of gold. Some people did, most didn't. And so, some of those realities are things we're going to be talking about almost exclusively in this episode. So,
Which therefore possibly, maybe, spoiler alert, led to a riot.
so let's see here. William Andrew Clark was born in Pennsylvania in 1839. His family moved to Iowa, where he attended law school. After that, he was a school teacher and apparently briefly fought in the Confederacy before going westward to seek his fortune.
Weekend warrior, huh?
Yeah, I didn't know they had a National Guard in the Confederacy, but evidently,
Go be an asshole for a weekend and then come back.
I liked just a school teacher, Confederate soldier, miner, but he did make enough. He did make enough money to kind of start a freight company.
I mean, that's like to start like you just have a bunch of all of a sudden just like teacher, and then now you're a freight guy.
Yeah, I mean, he came from a business family. He started a freight company that would ship supplies on the backs of mules from Salt Lake City to the boomtowns of Montana, and all while charging exorbitant fees. He then got into wholesaling, mail transportation, and banking, and by 30, he was a millionaire and one of the leading financiers in the territory of Montana. In 1872, he bought 4 claims in Butte, and this was able to let him add silver to his growing empire. All right, so Marcus Daly.
Silver. We love silver.
Marcus Daly. Calm down now. Marcus Daly immigrated to New York alone and penniless at 15. End of story. Now, by 21, he made his way to Nevada working on a Comstock load. This is where he found out that he actually was really good at mining, and over time he had earned a reputation of being one of the West's best leading young miners. After superintending 2 booming mines for the Walker brothers of Salt Lake City, he helped them find a profitable mine to purchase in Butte and was given the opportunity to run it. He accepted this, and he ran it for 5 years. After that, in 1881, he struck out on his own and bought the nearby Anaconda mine for $30,000. Funding for buying and turning this mine profitable was provided by himself and his partners, one of which was his friend from the Comstock days, George Hearst, father of famous newsman William Randolph Hearst, and grandfather of a woman that upset some people at a bank one time. I'm not really sure.
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah. I bet he was a lovely person who was very morally, secure.
Secure.
George Hearst?
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, any Hearst. I'm sure they're just fine. I'm sure they're all kind, nice people, right?
They were all
because
straight
money
shooters.
does that. Yeah.
Right.
Money fixes them.
This story will prove that, actually. The next year, while blasting at the 300-foot level of the Anaconda, workers uncovered copper. Although not as coveted as silver, Daly was ecstatic at the discovery because this was at the very beginning of the world's becoming electrified, and copper was about to become a huge commodity. Back then, just as now, copper was used in most electronics, and only 2 years before, Edison had patented the incandescent light bulb. It turned out that Daly's men had uncovered what would be the largest copper deposit in the world, and it would make Butte and the copper capital of the world. This finding allowed Daly and Clark to become rich and powerful beyond their most ambitious expectations. while Clark would find success in continuing to build his empire by buying successful mining interests, banking concerns, as well as other investments. Marcus Daly achieved this by transforming the small Anaconda mine into the world's largest copper operation that would go on to pay 3/4 of Montana's wage earners. Not too
I just
shabby.
imagine I just am trying to imagine like the sign of like welcome to Butte, and it's just like all the list of all the things you just said, like with like, you know, award and like #1 and biggest selling and yada yada. And then you look over the sign and it's just like this big wet, like gray lump of a city.
Yeah.
We'll get into that. In 1881, Clark's business success naturally made him think that he would be great in D.C., and so he ran for a non-voting delegate position in Congress, as Montana was still a territory. You just had representation there, kind of like Puerto Rico now. It was Clark's political ambition that would spark the rivalry between him and Daly that would shape the city of Butte and the state of Montana that can still be seen and felt today. For reasons that are lost to history, Daly had never really liked Clark. But when Clark's run for Senate had the potential to negatively affect his own business, Daly turned someone he disliked into an enemy and set upon setting up schemes to ensure to foil Clark's run for the Senate. He made sure that his employees were voting correctly, right? This was done with the help of his foreman and his companies. And, they were tasked with collecting the workers' ballots and were instructed to ensure that the ballots matched the correct candidates before turning them to the authorities. This evidently worked because Clark lost 14 out of the 16 counties.
Oof, that's rough.
Well, yeah, that's painful.
So later
you voted like, let me take a look at that. Let me make sure you did it right. Okay, good. And then what was the penalty, or what would happen to the people who didn't vote correctly?
You'd get your. It sounds like you just get your ballot changed and nothing.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. It didn't sound like a strong arm thing. It just
They just scribble out the name and then just put the okay.
Yeah.
This Dominion voting machine. No, I'm just joking.
Don't do that. They'll sue you.
Oh shit. We'll take that out.
Just bleep it out. Just bleep it out, and there'll be mystery.
In 1899, Montana had entered statehood and was granted 2 representatives in the in the Senate, and Clark once again set his sights on Washington. Back then, seats were not elected by popular vote, just a small group of legislators. And so if you had, like, let's say, a newspaper and a bunch of money, one could see how, you could sway a bunch of people to vote your way. According to Punke, Clark spent $431,000 buying 47 votes to win the seat, and that's in 1890s money. Even back then, this kind of political corruption was egregious, and before the vote even took place, the Montana legislature formed a committee to look into the case of, this clearly brazen corruption. However, Clark was able to use his money to buy up the grand jurors, and no evidence was found to convict him on the state level. One witness that testified against Clark by surprising everyone with $30,000 in cash that he had been given into as a bribe from Clark was now somehow disqualified from being in state Congress. So,
That's, and you got, like you said, like, it's like, even for the time, they're like, hey, this is pretty obvious, man. Like, you got to tone this down.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, we're punching each other in here, but like, this is unruly what you're up to.
Right. So like, Daly used his influence because he had, he owned papers. He had friends in Washington, so he kind of beat his drum of Clark's obvious misconduct in the ears of anyone who would listen. And when Clark finally did arrive on D.C. on his first day as senator, he found that there had been 2 separate petitions, one from his opposing legislator and the other from Governor of Montana, Robert B. Smith, that was set up to disqualify him from the Senate due to his bribery. This did lead to an ethics investigation in the U.S. Senate that resulted in both parties voting unanimously that Clark's election was null and void due to all the bribing, and they actually just sent Clark back to Butte. Now, back in Butte, this caused a sort of constitutional crisis because Clark was disqualified. The governor, who was an ally of Daley, had to take up the Senate seat instead, which meant that his lieutenant governor, E.A. Springs, would fill the governor's seat. However, Springs, being a Clark ally, would then appoint Clark back to the Senate seat. And, when he would get, this would cause the Governor Smith to run back to Butte to declare Springs' actions invalid. Washington just said, you guys need to figure this out on your own. It actually never gets resolved, and citizens of Montana are underrepresented until the next term. So it just kind of was depressing because Montana had just fought so hard to become a state. Now they were underrepresented. Underrepresented.
Upper representable.
Unforgivable.
Ungovernable.
My mouth has become ungovernable.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, back in Montana Daily, his health was deteriorating. So he kind of picked up his ball and went home and sold his Anaconda empire to Standard Oil, who everyone knows and loves, in the April of 1899 for a price of $39 million, meaning that the largest holding of copper in the world, along with a slew of other industries that support the mines, totaling 3/4 of all Montana wage earners, was in the hands of East Coast corporations with the end game of monopolizing the copper industry, just like they had done with the oil industry. Are you guys excited to hear what happens next?
Yes, I'm on the edge of my seat.
All right.
Yeah.
Standard
All right,
Oil
I'm
immediately set to
fast
work.
forward.
Yeah, so they create this holding company, calling it Amalgamated, because it's a good name and everyone loves it. It's like X.
Sure.
And
Catches.
offered shares to the public for the next month. And they actually end up making back 3/3 of the money that they had paid for the mine in 1 month. So they're doing pretty good, right? Year after that, they engage in a little bit of market manipulation, and they would artificially inflate the price of copper when selling their stocks, and then they would artificially decrease the price of copper when buying the stocks back, and this would make them millions, and their investors would just lose a bunch of money. But
Buy low, sell high.
yeah, there you go, you got it. Amalgamated continued to try and buy up the rest
Rolls
of
right off the
it
tongue
does
like a giant mattress.
Yeah.
like a mining disaster.
Like a right out of your mouth.
The rest of Butte's, so they're trying to buy up the rest of Butte's copper claims, and there was little anyone could really do to stop them, except maybe one man, two men actually, our boy William Clark and the 29-year-old conniving frat guy named Frederick Augustus Hines, seen right here. He was born in Brooklyn in 1869. He arose to prominence using his family's wealth, a deep understanding of mining, brazenness, legal loopholes, straight conning. He loved himself many shady business schemes, but in one of the his most lucrative would be taking advantage of something called the Apex rule. Now, it does sound...
He definitely looks like the poster child for frat boys.
Yeah, no, I mean,
he looks like the villain of like a BioShock game.
He does.
A little bit. I mean, a little bit.
But in a fancier shirt collar.
Yeah. Less sci-fi.
I totally agree. But, there is a little bit of me that kind of likes this guy because he does kind of... He does kind of fuck with people, but...
Wait, did you say one of his 5 names was Heinz? As in, like, does that have to do with like Heinz ketchup?
I was thinking of that.
Unfortunately,
too.
not.
Oh, okay. I was like, Rich, maybe he got his money from ketchup.
Yeah, I mean that it would, because it would make sense right?
Right?
Ketchup
Yeah,
money.
yeah, yeah. He's like, clearly I come from a dynasty.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, so he would take advantage of something called the apex rule. Basically, it was a Montana law that would dictate mineral rights as be defined as where a vein comes closest to the surface. So, for example, if the apex is under your claim, you could dig as far as that vein goes, even if it went underneath others' claims. Hines would buy claims near, you know, others, and then he would dig his using the apex rule, dig as deep as he could go, justify digging really close to the mine, and then he would just kind of go in and steal a bunch of ore from the other mines. Um,
The tried and true milkshake method.
yes,
The
yes,
milkshake
no,
method.
100%. This would actually get him sued a lot. He didn't mind going to court.
Shockingly.
Yeah, he didn't mind going to court because, you know, he's a charismatic guy. You know, people liked him in town, and he had a lot of friends that were lawyers and judges. And, most of the time, the judges just couldn't find anything to convict poor little Frederick.
Yeah, they
that's
lost all
why
the
you
paperwork.
Yeah, it's why you become friends with people like that, so
Yeah.
you can do all the shit and get away with
See,
it.
the thing is, me and Hines were hanging out at the saloon, and all the paperwork just got, I don't know, we just misplaced it. I guess you're good.
Oh my God! Speaking of judges, I should have taken this out of the story, but I just love this story so much about my Judge Clancy here. So bear with me. One of the
Okay.
more notable judges that had always been friendly to Hines was the colorful William Clancy. Punk
Not
describes
related to
him.
Tom Clancy.
Let's say yes. But Punk describes him of having a cartoonish appearance that was dominated by a tangled gray beard, and when he was dealing with witnesses he didn't care for, especially Hines's rival, he would act disinterested, at times even falling asleep. At one time, he got irritated with a particularly long-winded witness and yelled, "It seems to me the witness has trouble with constipation of thought and diarrhea of words." So, another. Can you imagine the judge saying that to you as a witness? Another anecdote.
I don't think you made a good first impression, Big Dog.
Another anecdote was a man approached the judge saying, "I bet you $1 I could tell you what you had for breakfast this morning." "You're on," said Judge Clancy. "Ham and eggs," the man said, lifting his dirty ass beard and pointing to the evidence. "You lose," Clancy said. "That was yesterday's breakfast." So, I mean, you can see this guy's a really.
Ew.
He's using his beard as a leftover. Oh, ugh.
That's so gross.
Oh,
So yeah, an outstanding steward of the law.
Jesus.
With
Well,
Don't stand too close to him. He smells like yesterday's breakfast.
Well, you know what? In a town of stinky people, this must be like how they all know each other. It's just.
Yeah.
So this.
Oh, I smell a
Ham and eggs, that must
ham
be
and eggs.
him.
Hines must be nearby.
Smells like the good ham and eggs. Must be a judge.
There must be a judge over here.
Clancy would actually be an integral part of Haynes's boldest scheme yet, and that was actually taking down the Agglomated Mining Trust. And he probably knew that there was a little chance of him actually doing this, especially because they had the backing of Standard Oil. But he probably figured, since the company had millions of dollars in court tied up for him poaching their ore, there was the fact that they pretty much hated him for sure, and he might as well use an enemy for all that he could, right? So he kind of played into the rivalry to shape his public persona of being a Davis versus Goliath character, a little miner against the big corporate outsiders, right?
Right. Classic story.
So in the election of 1900, to maintain friendly judges, Hines briefly partners up with Clark. He's running for Senate again and launches a campaign against the Agglomated too. The Agglomated did everything they could to counter this, including buying up a bunch of newspapers in Montana to slander the name of both Clark and Hines. But in the end, it turns out the Copper Trust just had to kind of threaten threatened Clark, and he's like, "Yeah, no, actually, I'll turn against Hines, no problem." But in the end, both men got what they want. Even with his blatant corruption in the election of 1899, Clark was elected and able to sit in the U.S. Senate, and Hines got friendly judges. He got his friendly judges, and in November 12th of that year, Marcus Daly passes away. And so that was the first of the Copper Kings that left the situation entirely, I guess. Hines then set about another part of his scheme to break the amalgamated. He had some of his people purchase a few shares of their holdings that were being taken over by the trust. Then he sued them, saying that, because you guys are absorbing the company and we didn't have any say in that, we think that the deal should be null and void, right? The case was brought before Honorable Ham and Cheese Clancy, and on October
Ham and cheese.
on October
Ham and cheese.
Ham and cheese alert! Ham and cheese alert!
Oh, ham and eggs. Sorry,
No, excuse me.
that
Ham
was
and
his
cheese.
breakfast 2 days ago.
Yeah,
on
ham
and
and cheese is
cheese.
ham and cheese is the mailman. That's the
Yeah.
So Judge Grodybeard did on October 22nd rule in favor of Hines's allies, and if the ruling stood, the amalgamated would need to break up. In retaliation to this ruling, the Copper Trust actually made everyone go on strike, which is interesting. They said, "Tools down, boys," and within hours of Clancy's decision, they shut down all operations. Overnight, 3/4 of Montana's wage earners had no jobs. They then demanded that Haynes' buddies sell off the noted shares and drop the suit. Haynes decided to go ahead and make a show out of it like he always did, and he said he would give his answer the next day at the courthouse steps. At the promised location and time, Hines addressed an angry crowd of 1,000 recently unemployed workers, worrying about the winter months ahead. Being quite charismatic, he gave a rousing speech in which he claimed it was his fight against Standard Oil was also their fight, and it worked, and he was able to maintain public support from the people there. Well, at least long enough so that he could get away from the mob. Standard Oil said, "You know what, we're just going to go ahead and talk to the governor of Montana, Joseph K. Toole." And they said, "You know what, in exchange for resuming mining operations, the governor, how about you create a special session of Montana state legislature that would be directed to pass a new law not allowing so-called obnoxious judges to rule in civic cases." They're like, "How about you call it the Clancy Law?" So
yeah,
the governor,
Wonderful.
the governor
in
was,
honor of you.
to the governor's credit, at first he was like, "I don't know, guys, that sounds like blackmail." But with winter coming, so many people out of work, political pressure built, and on December 1st, 1903, Montana legislature convened a special session, and by December 10th, amalgamated had got their new law, and Hines lost his ace in the hole. Just 3 years later, after a few last bars with the amalgamated, he hung up his hat and sold his holdings in Butte to the trust for $12 million and moved to a double suite at the Waldorf Hotel in New York and married an actress, and lost most of his money on banking ventures, and he later died of corrosive liver at the age of 49.
Oh, that sucks.
Wow.
So here's another picture of William Clark.
Oof.
Yeah.
I can only imagine how many.
Impressive bearded
breakfasts?
mustache, though.
Yeah, that guy. He must have like three compartments in his beard for his breakfast.
Oh yeah. One for the coffee alone.
Yeah.
So,
a little nest in there.
This guy's back. So this guy's story was after he served just one term in the U.S. Senate, Clark too sold most of his Montana holdings and spent his times in New York and in Europe collecting art and living in his 121-room Fifth Avenue mansion with his second wife, Anna Eugene LaChapelle, who in 1901 was 23 when she married Clark, who was 62. The two met when she was a teenage ward to Clark, or what we would call today adopted.
Ew.
Gross.
And so here's a picture of the newlywed couple.
Oh boy, look how. Oh,
Oh, ew. She's
uh,
absolutely lovely, and that's just, yeah, no.
it's.
Yeah.
I
So
like. I do like the printer's juxtaposition of making him look like an evil Confederate general, and like the background with like the very intense like, yeah, he's
I'm
clearly the villain.
I'm going to be honest with you
And
guys. After reading a
yeah,
little bit about this guy is definitely coming back to this podcast. We are definitely going to have to talk more about him.
can I just say one word?
Absolutely.
Grooming.
Yes. Well, yeah. This was. I mean,
Definitely.
I mean,
just to remember that there wasn't so long ago a time where like some half of this country was considered, more or less property to a minority. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
most definitely.
well, he was a minor. Sorry. So sorry.
Short.
hey man,
I just
you did. Oh, that was a good one.
back to the
Yeah.
story.
After
Okay.
that incredible pun.
So, what was coined as the War of the Copper Kings was at an end. Its conclusion meant the transfer of copper mining operations in the state from competing so called frontier industrialists to one publicly traded company. These rivalries between men like Daly, Clark, and Hines, although retired and dead, their squabbles over the richest hill on earth would actually leave the town of Butte to deal with the consequences. At one time, Butte actually had some of the world's best organized labor. By 1890, this was around the time where that was kicking off. Men like Clark and Daly and Hines did everything they could to screw each other over, but they did need their workers to help with their ambition. And so, to prevent them from working with their rivals, they treated their workers relatively well for the time. By little things like paying decent wage and showing tolerance to the unions, right? In 1878, Union had its first union, and by 1885, the Butte Miners Union negotiated a closed shop contract with Butte management. This meant that mining companies could only hire union workers, and they also recognized the union, which is a big deal. This was all done at a time where in other parts of the country, workers had been struggling, often violently, with management to get similar deals. However,
Yeah.
the takeover by Standard Oil signaled the end of the progress for unionism in Butte. By 1906, because the Amalgamated had was the largest employer in Butte and in the state, it gave it immense power over politics and, of course, the workforce. The amount of copper mining operations over West of America and then and South America later, Standard Oil goal of making the Amalgamated the only name in copper was no longer achievable. But they still had to, they still owed their shareholders, to make a profit. So to do this, they needed to remain competitive. So greater pushes were made to increase efficiency. Now, unfortunately, this would lead to stagnation, if not retraction in wages and workers' safeties. Workers they saw as potential liabilities, aka make a fuss out of such things, would be let go. Such example was in 1903 when they fired hundreds of socialists and suspected socialists from one of the smelters, and later in 1921, in reaction to Butte electing a socialist mayor, the company fired 500 mostly Finnish miners due to their alleged leftist leanings. There was an influx of immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe that would fill the vacancy created by these firings. The new miners, though, were paid much less than those they replaced. They tended to be far less experienced, had less training, and would contribute to the increasingly hazardous working conditions. Now, in
Yeah,
December,
doesn't sound like the most worker friendly kind of environment.
no,
Almost definitely not.
in in December of that year, Standard Oil introduced the Rustling card system that made anyone looking for mining work uh, have to apply for this job, and they were the applicant would be subjected to an investigation. You could be denied for any reason. The system made an atmosphere of fear, making workers unwilling to speak out about things like wage and safety concerns. Right. The Rustling card
That's
system.
just in the job interview?
Yeah, so basically, like if you wanted to work, you have to apply for this Rustling card, and basically they, would investigate you, make sure you weren't having any socialistic thoughts or, weren't making a big fuss. Another thing this did was it made it so that the closed shop deal was no longer there. So now you not only so that was bad because you needed a Rustling card to work, but you didn't need to be in a union to work. And so, that kind of, significantly decreased the union's power. You would think the Butte's miners' union's reaction to the new arrangements was, to many, very lackluster. Some even accused the union of being a tool of the Copper Trust. In 1907 and 1912, union leadership had agreed to deals that kept wages as low as they had been in 1878, thus not compensating for inflation, and both made no mention to safety standards. After the firings in 1912, union leadership voted not to strike, causing the Finns to feel that the Irish and Cornish members had turned on them. This would be one of the factors that would shape Butte's Finnish population to the most radical groups in the decades to come. The Union, on the other hand, was never that radical. However, some members were beginning to resent its conservative leadership. Anger over wage and safety towards the Copper Trust and frustration towards the union's inactions would boil over in June, later known as the violence of 1914. So on June 11th of 1914, a miner named Michael Mucky McDonald refused to show his union member card to the union inspectors. So the next day, a shift of 400 miners also did the same thing and refused to show their cards. And that night, a meeting was held to protest a union by boycotting the Miners' Union Day parade that was taking place the next day. The few hundred miners that bothered showing up to march in the parade ended up being just attacked by an angry mob of protesters that, after disrupting the parade, made its way to the Union Hall, breaking its windows and smashing its furniture and dynamiting the safe open. 9 days later, 4,000 miners, 4,000 miners formed the new Butte Mine Workers Union, headed by Mucky McDonald himself. Let's see
what day did you say this was? What was the date?
June 11th is when they checked Mucky's card. And
that's fun. That's my birthday.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll make sure to light an extra candle for the miners next time.
Okay, here we go. 11 days later, the president of the Western Federation of Miners, Charles Mayer, an ally of Butte's old union, came to see if he could settle things down and traveled to Butte to have a meeting at the Union Hall, or whatever was left at it. His meeting was interrupted when several hundred of the new union members surrounded the hall and began throwing rocks and eggs. A man making his way up to the Union Hall was shot and killed by someone inside. It turned out that he was actually for the old union and was only trying to attend the meeting. No less, that shooting led to more shooting from both in and outside the hall, leaving many bystanders injured and another person killed. Moyer escaped out the back. Around the same time, a group of rioters robbed a mine at gunpoint for a substantial amount of dynamite and made their way back to the Union Hall. Over the next few hours, 23 charges rendered the Union Hall into rubble. At no time did law enforcement intervene.
I like as you're saying this, like I am now thinking like, wow, that really is like one of the worst group of people to piss off is a bunch of miners who know how to use dynamite.
Yeah, exactly.
Or just find it. Like,
Yeah, that's just like, oh, dynamite, perfect. Oh here, it's like we know where it's at. Let's break into this.
yeah, no, I mean,
Oh
all
man.
their tools are dynamite and like pickaxes. They're
Like the only group I could think of that would be like as dangerous, if not more, would be like plumbers. Like if they just went around and just like did stuff to our water or like you know what I mean? Like that would just be that would cripple us.
I just imagined an army of Marios, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
When the Great War started later that summer, the need for copper reduced considerably. Although this need would come back as the war progressed, many of the miners were actually laid off. This increased the new union membership with by 5,000. That said, signing
Wow.
up wasn't always really a choice. It was said that some who refused were sometimes threatened with violence or deportation. So,
What
on,
do who do you like more? This contract or your face?
my face,
Great, sign the contract.
uh, on August 30th.
Sign right here,
Sign
right
right
on
here to
this
keep
line.
this keeps your face. So there you go.
All right. All right, Marcelo, we got some more dynamite for you. On August 30th, the office where the rustling cars were issued got dynamited. No one knows who.
Oh,
Agglomated puts up a $10,000 reward for any information on the vandalism. However, the new union maintains that they blew up their own office to justify calling the National Guard. Regardless of who blew it up, after the governor declared a state of emergency in Butte, 500 National Guard troops armed with Gatling and machine guns marched in and
whoa.
took control of the town. During the occupation, the military tribunes were held to try citizens. Mucky McDonald, for example, was convicted of kidnapping because of the forced deportations and was sentenced to jail. The socialist mayor was impeached for not maintaining order, and along with press censorship, public assembly was also forbidden.
Wow.
So the
That's some
agglomated
BS.
right? The Agglomated went ahead and took this opportunity to deal a death blow to the Union. After almost 3 decades, it officially de-recognized the old Union, leaving the miners and citizens in Butte left alone against the Agglomated and those who controlled it. The next year, probably because of, the summer of violence, and it was a shit
Mhm.
name, Agglomated changed its name back to Anaconda, which is fitting as a company that would squeeze anything they could out of whatever they could get their hands on.
Yeah, it's
What?
just like strangling this little town.
Right? It's pr- pretty on the nose.
Yeah.
One mining but there was one mining operation that was kind of an outliner, and this was the Granite Mountain Shaft, along with its sister shaft, the Speculator. Both were owned by the North Butte Mining Company, which was independent from the Anaconda. Over the years, it had earned a reputation of being a pretty safe mine, and they were in fact working to install a sprinkler system in their 3,600-foot Granite Mountain shaft to reduce the risk of fire.
And
So
to help with all the succulents.
right, yeah, you got to have some breathing
Spruce up the
plants
work
down there.
environment.
Yeah, it's important. One of the final tasks needed before completing that project was moving the electrical transformer away from dry timber of the shaft walls to a deeper part inside the mine. This was, again, to reduce the risk of fire.
Yeah.
Um, this is kind of ironic. To do this, a longer electrical cable was needed to be installed so that the transformer could be connected to the power source outside. Um,
I mean, can I ask you this, Mason? And
sure.
this might be a little bit of a weird personal question, but like, have you ever like been in like an underground like hole situation, like where you're like fully underground? Like, have you ever been in something like that?
I What? I mean, do you mean like if I'm in like some sort of bunker or cave
Yeah,
or?
yeah, 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 yeah. But like with dirt, like in an deep underground, like 6 feet underground dirt, like thing. Have you ever been in something like that?
I've not been in a grave.
Oh, whoops. I guess we had different childhoods. Okay. Well, I don't know. Okay, so I grew up in like North County or San Diego or whatever, but like I remember specifically my neighbors down the street had like an underground thing that they made. Like it wasn't quite a bunker, but like they had a piece of plywood over the top of it. But I remember going down there and it was always like excessively warm. I just like right now everything you're describing, I'm imagining machinery in this like already weird kind of like damp environment. And then it just gets very, very hot with all the machine. Like that just sounds like a nightmare. That sounds terrible.
Yeah, no, I mean, the more you read about the conditions of miners, always, even now, the more you get really thankful that you're not a miner. That's at least my
Right? Yeah.
experience. I have,
All respect to miners. All respect to miners. But just like that does not sound like a chill environment.
no,
Yeah, definitely not something for me.
yeah, absolutely not. I
Pay you
don't,
what you are owed. I will pass on that job.
yeah, no,
Most definitely.
and also, I just want to tell you, Marcelo, it sounds like your buddy had a foxhole, not,
Hey, I didn't say grave. You said grave. Okay, let's just be clear about that.
he said
I
6
mean-
feet. That's why I,
Well, I mean, okay. And there was another thing. There was this like empty lot where there was also another hole that someone had dug, but that one like there was like a tunnel system. I I don't know, man. It was the 90s. It was weird.
no, it
Whatever.
was the 90s. There was a lot of stuff going down in the parts of the country where we were growing up during the 90s, and it was
Yeah.
a lot of it
Nobody
had to
had
do with
phone-
meth. That's for sure.
Yes. Nobody had phones, so you had to occupy yourself.
But yeah, so because this was, pretty deep mine, 3,600 foot shaft, they needed a pretty long cable. It was a 1,200 foot long, 5 inches in diameter. Now, this was in the time before plastic was on insulation for wires. So instead, electrical insulation was made up of oil-soaked cloth protected by lead coating. The whole mess weighed about 5 pounds per foot, and the whole cable weighed about 3 tons. Those who
Why
don't,
the oil? Why the oil?
the oil-soaked racks,
Yeah,
to insulate it.
That seems contradictory.
No, the lead keeps it all on the inside. It's fine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's what the lead's for.
So, for those who don't know, mine shafts are vertical and are split up. This mine, at least, is split up in 100-foot intervals called sections. So, 2,000 section equals to 2,000 feet underground. At each of these stations, sorry, I meant to say stations, but at each of these stations, tunnels will kind of spiderweb out, and this is where the ore is mined from. So they'll kind of bring it back in the carts and put it in, bring it towards the shaft. And we're talking about a shaft that's 5 foot by 17 foot. And this would contain 3 hoists or elevator. It's kind of like a mix between an elevator and a cage. 2 hoists carry up the ore, and the one in the middle called the chippy. This was moved for moving men and equipment. These hoists would be controlled by hoist men that would be on the surface. So remember that little box you saw in the beginning?
Yeah.
That would be the powerhouse. The hoist man would be, I believe on this platform right here. Just kind of they would have a bell system here. What did I write here?
Well, I mean, like, and my question is like, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, but like, well, and anywhere in the research did you see like what the like temperature was like down there? Was it a cold environment or was it a hot environment? Like,
so yeah, no, the thing. Okay, so when this event takes place, it's going to be in January. The thing about Montana in January is as cold as it kind of gets. So they would just be working in this hot ass environment in the middle of a mine,
like a winter
and
storm.
they'd be completely sweaty. And then when they come up, they would actually go into shock when they would hit the elements on the top of the mine. So what they actually had was something called a dry room. And this was a room where you would come up and you would go in and you would just kind of hang out while you changed your clothes
And just like
into
adjust
something
your
dry.
temperature.
So Yeah, so you wouldn't be just whiplashed into a new environment.
Woof.
But yeah,
Okay, well, yeah, that does not sound any better.
yeah,
Thank you for telling me.
scary questions. Um, but yeah, uh, so these the hoists were controlled by the hoistmen, and there was a system of electronic bells that they would use to signal, to uh, bring up the hoist up or down, right? Um, in the early morning of June 8th, sorry, I did say it was in January earlier, but this was in June. It's just still cold in June sometimes in Montana. In the early morning on June 8th, a work crew of 9 men made their way with the instructions to lower this 3-ton cable into place. Their plan was to tie a hoisting rope to the chippy and then attach the cable using cloths. Strap a rope at the bottom of the chippy, and then they would kind of lower the elevator down. And as they lowered the elevator down, they would slowly tie this giant cable onto that rope. After working intensely for about 16 hours, they discovered that the lower 200 feet of the cable had actually wrapped around the hoisting rope, kind of like a snake around a pole.
Once again, the anaconda.
Right.
Wait.
They started to remove the lashing around the wrap, and they would around the wrap section, thinking that this would make it unravel. Around 8 o'clock, this huge cable starts to slip. Workers rush towards cover in the 2600 section, and just as soon as they got cover, the cable began its violent descent, destroying everything in its way. Air hoses, water pipes, brackets, all scraped off by the massive cable that simultaneously was stripped of its lead and oil-soaked installation. One can only imagine the noise this made, right? When the awful roaring stopped and the dust clears, workers could see that the cable, like a hair clog in the drain of some industrial giant, was wrapped around and caught in the shaft between the 2400 and 2800 stations. The workers, relieved for their lives, saw that there was nothing really they could do, and they'd been working for 18 hours. And it was their time to clock off.
I'm over this.
Yeah.
I'm done with this.
When they reached the top, they reported the lost cable to Ernest Salio, the assistant foreman on the graveyard shift. It would be him and his men tasked with the removal of the massive cable. The tired crew were most likely nervous about telling Salu about what happened. After all, the cable they wrecked would cost the company about $5,000. This was the equivalent of a year's wage for for 4 miners, I should say.
Sally, I imagine that conversation went something along the lines of like, not it.
Yeah, you're right. Sally would too be forgiven for being irritated after hearing, that kind of news at the beginning of his shift. But what the workman and Saul couldn't have imagined was that in 2 hours' time, Saul and more than 400 men would be fighting for their lives in the mines below their feet. And that's the end of part 1.
Oh, man. I mean, what do you call a cliffhanger that goes down?
What do I call the what?
A cliffhanger that goes into the ground.
A mine.
There you go.
So what you all think about that story?
Pretty crazy so far.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how this disaster movie plays out.
I mean, I would say the same, but I know how it plays out, and I can't wait to tell you guys more about it. That said, I'd like to tell the listeners to go ahead and make any comments you would like on whatever platform you're listening to. Please leave a review. It will definitely help us with our what do you call it? Algorithm? Algamated.
Yeah,
Algorithm
amalgamated algorithm.
in ways I don't quite understand, but like and subscribe and all that jazz. I'm Mason. Thank you so much for listening. As always, keep climbing.
All right, till next time, lovelies.
And until next time, guys, take a hike.